The boy was 11 years old, barefoot in January, and he was standing outside the glass doors of the Hargrove building like he belonged there. That was the part that stopped Edmund Hargrove cold. Not the bare feet, not the thin jacket that was more holes than fabric. Not even the cardboard sign the boy held against his chest, the letters shaky and oversized the way children write, when they're trying very hard to be believed. It was the way the boy stood, spine straight, chin level, eyes tracking every person who walked past him without stopping. Not desperate, not pleading, just watching. The way someone watches when they've learned that watching is safer than asking. Edmund had seen 1,000 things in 43 years of building one of Chicago's most profitable real estate firms. He had seen men cry in his office when he bought their companies. He had seen his own reflection in windows of buildings he'd demolished and felt nothing. He had buried his wife 6 years ago and gone back to work the next morning because he didn't know what else to do with grief that size. But something about that boy outside the glass doors made Edmund Hargrove stop walking. His assistant, Brenda, was already 3 steps ahead before she noticed. "Mr. Hargrove, give me a minute," he said. He pushed through the revolving door. The January wind hit him like a fist. The boy looked up, dark eyes, hollow cheeks, a smear of something dried on his temple that might have been blood or might have been mud. And Edmund saw, just for a second, something flicker across that small face. Not hope, not yet, something more careful than hope. "What does your sign say?" Edmund asked, because from this distance he still couldn't quite read it. The boy lowered the cardboard slowly so Edmund could see. "My name is Wren. I know where your son is." Edmund Hargrove had not spoken his son's name out loud in 4 years. The last time he said it was at a cemetery in the rain, and he had told himself afterward that he would never say it again, because saying it felt like opening a door to a room he couldn't survive walking into. His son, Patrick, had been missing for 4 years, 2 months and 11 days. The police had eventually stopped calling. The investigator Edmund hired had eventually stopped finding new leads. The world had eventually, gently, firmly, the way the world does, suggested that Edmund accept what the evidence pointed toward. A 26-year-old man with no body, no trace, no farewell note, who had simply ceased to exist between a Tuesday evening and a Wednesday morning. Edmund had accepted nothing. "Come inside," he said to the boy. "You'll freeze." Wren Okafor was 11 3/4, he specified, when Brenda set a cup of hot chocolate in front of him in the conference room. He wrapped both hands around it immediately, and Edmund watched those hands, knuckles scabbed, nails chewed to nothing, and made himself stay very still, the way you stay still around something that startles easily. "Where are your parents?" Edmund asked. "Don't have any." Wren said it the way you say it's raining, a fact, nothing more. "I have an aunt, but she moved to Cincinnati and forgot to tell me." Edmund absorbed this. "How long have you been on your own?" "Since October." Wren looked at him steadily. "I'm not here about that. I know what you're here about." "Then you know I'm not lying." Edmund laced his fingers together on the conference table. He had sat across from liars his entire professional life. He knew the particular quality of a child's lie, the way the eyes darted, the way a story came a little too smoothly or a little too haltingly. Wren Okafor was not lying. Edmund didn't know how he knew this, but he knew it the way he knew weather, the way you know things that live in your bones. "Tell me what you know," Edmund said, and Wren told him. It started, Wren explained, with a storage unit in Cicero. Wren had been sleeping in the unit. He'd found the door with a broken latch in late November, and it was dry, and anything dry was better than the alternative. The unit belonged to a man named Doyle. Wren had never met Doyle, only heard him. Men came and went at odd hours, and Wren had gotten very good at being invisible in the back corner behind 3 stacked boxes and an old vacuum cleaner. He hadn't understood most of what the men said, but he had understood a name, Patrick Hargrove. He had heard it 3 times over 2 weeks. The first time it meant nothing to him. The second time he heard it alongside the phrase "still breathing," and something cold moved through him. The third time he heard a different man say the family stopped looking, and another man laugh in a way that made Wren's stomach hurt even now, recounting it across a conference table with hot chocolate going cold between his hands. After the third time, Wren had gone to the library. He had searched the name. He had found the news articles, son of Chicago developer, missing since 2022, and he had found Edmund Hargrove's face in a photograph outside a courthouse, and Wren had thought, in the straightforward way that children think when they haven't yet learned that some problems are too large for them, someone should tell that man. "You came all the way here to tell me," Edmund said. "The library said your building was 4 miles. Wren shrugged one shoulder. "I've walked farther." Edmund looked at the boy for a long moment. Outside the conference room windows, Chicago spread gray and enormous in every direction. Inside, the heat hummed. Wren's eyes were drooping slightly, the heat and the chocolate doing what hunger and cold had held at bay. "You can sleep," Edmund said. "We'll talk more when you wake up." "I don't know you." "No," Edmund agreed. "You don't." Wren thought about this. He looked at Edmund the way Edmund had seen engineers look at load-bearing walls, trying to calculate what would hold. Then, with the pragmatism of someone who has learned that trust is sometimes the only currency you have left, he folded his arms on the conference table and put his head down and was asleep in under a minute. Edmund sat across from him and did not move for a long time. He made calls that afternoon. The first was to a private investigator named Sutton. Not the firm he'd used before, but a woman a federal court had recommended quietly, the kind of quiet that meant she finds things other people can't. The second call was to his attorney. The third was to the police detective who had handled Patrick's case, a man named Bryce Morello, who still picked up Edmund's calls, even though there was officially nothing to investigate. Morello listened without interrupting. When Edmund finished, Morello said, "The kid could be running a grift. He's 11. Kids run grifts. He walked 4 miles in January with no shoes." A silence. "Send me what you have," Morello said. What Edmund had was a child's account of a storage unit and a name overheard 3 times. He knew this. He also knew that in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days, it was the first thing that had felt, in some place beneath reason, like a direction. He had Brenda find a hotel 2 blocks away. He had Brenda also find a children's clothing store that delivered same day, and he gave her a size estimate based on looking at the boy. Small for 11, he thought. Smaller than his son had been at 11, though the comparison rose up without invitation, and he pressed it back down. And Brenda, who had worked for Edmund for 19 years and knew when to ask questions and when not to, simply said, "I'll handle it." When Wren woke up, there were clothes in a bag beside him and a plate of food on the table, and Edmund Hargrove was still in the same chair, reading documents in the low afternoon light. "You stayed," Wren said. He sounded surprised. "You did," Edmund said. "Seemed fair." Sutton moved fast. Within 48 hours, she had identified the storage facility, identified a lease registered to a shell company that traced, through 2 layers, to a man named Reeves Callahan. Edmund did not know this name. He spent an evening learning it. Reeves Callahan was 51 years old and had worked for 11 years as a financial consultant to Hargrove Developments. He had been let go in a round of restructuring in 2019, 3 years before Patrick disappeared. He had contested the termination. The settlement had been handled quietly by Edmund's legal team, so quietly that Edmund, who had not personally overseen it, had not known the man's name until now. Edmund sat with this information in his home office at 2 in the morning and felt something settle into place inside him, with the cold precision of a key finding a lock. He had a direction now, a name, a shape to the thing that had been shapeless for 4 years. He had a boy to thank for it. Wren was staying in the hotel. Edmund was paying. Brenda was checking on him, and Edmund went to see him on the 3rd morning. He brought coffee for himself and orange juice for Wren because he was 11 and probably shouldn't have coffee, and they sat at the small table by the window and looked out at the city. "What happens now?" Wren asked. "People are looking," Edmund said. "The right people this time." Wren nodded. He had asked very few questions over the past 3 days about the investigation, as though having done his part, he was content to let the adult machinery take over. What he had asked questions about, in the evenings when Edmund came by, were smaller things. What kind of buildings Edmund built, what Patrick had been like as a kid, whether Edmund had ever eaten a deep dish pizza at the place on Wabash, because Wren had walked past it once, and the smell through the door was the best thing he had ever experienced in his life. "We'll go," Edmund told him. "When this is over, I'll take you." Wren looked at him sideways. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." Something shifted in Wren's face then, a careful, interior movement, like watching ice on a river flex under pressure but not quite break. He turned back to the window. "My mom used to say that," he said quietly. When she was going to do something good, she'd say, "I know I don't have to," like the point was that she wanted to. Edmund waited. "She got sick," Wren said. "She died in March. Then my dad, he wasn't the same after. He left in August. Then my aunt said she'd take care of me, and she didn't." He said all of this with the same flat weather report delivery as everything else, but Edmund noticed his hands around the orange juice. Tight. "I'm not asking for anything," Wren added quickly, as though he'd just remembered something important. "I just wanted you to know about Patrick. That's all I came for." Edmund Hargrove, who had built a 43-year career on being a man who made decisions, who calculated risk and exposure, and positioned himself never to be caught without an exit strategy, said, "What if there was more?" Wren looked at him. "What if there was more than that?" Edmund said. "For you. After." The boy was quiet for a long time, and Edmund let him be quiet because he understood that some answers need room to form. "I'd want to go back to school," Wren said finally, very quietly, as though this were an outrageous wish, as though asking for school was the boldest thing a person could do. "I liked school. Before everything." "Okay," Edmund said. "Okay," Wren repeated, like he was trying the word to see if it held weight. Sutton found the warehouse in Cicero on a Friday. She had traced Callahan's movements via phone records, via a credit card transaction at a gas station, via the particular and painstaking art of finding something when you are very good at finding things. She brought Morello in when the evidence was solid enough that he could do so officially. Edmund was not present for the raid. Morello had been firm about this, and Edmund had agreed because he was 70% afraid of what they would find, and he needed there to be someone else to receive that information first. He sat in his office on a Friday afternoon and could not read a single document. His phone rang at 4:47 p.m. It was Morello. He said 3 words before Edmund's brain could process anything further. "He's alive, Edmund." Patrick Hargrove was 26 years old. He had turned 30 while missing, and Edmund kept having to do this math and finding it impossible. No, wait, he was 30 now. He had turned 30 in a warehouse in Cicero. He was thin in a way that Edmund had to breathe through when he first saw him in the hospital, and there was damage to his knee, to his wrist, things Edmund would understand fully in the weeks ahead, but he was alive. He was sitting up in a hospital bed, and when Edmund walked through the door, Patrick's face did a thing that Edmund had not let himself imagine in 4 years, because imagining it and then not finding it would have ended him. "Dad," Patrick said. That was all. That was enough. That was, Edmund would think later, every word ever spoken in the history of the world condensed into one. He crossed the room and held his son, and did not say anything for a very long time because some moments are larger than language. Reeves Callahan was arrested that same evening, along with 2 associates. The charges were substantial and detailed, and would be fully reported in the following days in newspapers, that Edmund did not read because he was at the hospital, and then he was bringing Patrick home, and then he was doing nothing but being in the same room as his son, who was alive. The legal proceedings would take time. Callahan would eventually plead to reduced charges, and this would frustrate Edmund, and his attorney would counsel patience, and the frustration would eventually give way to something Edmund hadn't expected: indifference. Because Patrick was home. Because justice had been done in the way that justice is done: imperfect, procedural, and real. The governor of Illinois, who had received a campaign contribution from one of Callahan's shell companies, and who had used his influence to quietly discourage a particular line of inquiry in 2022, did not escape scrutiny. The investigation that followed took 18 months, and resulted in his resignation and criminal referral. Edmund did not take any particular satisfaction in this. He noticed it the way you notice weather. What he took satisfaction in, deep cellular, the kind that doesn't announce itself, was something else entirely. On the first day of March, a school in the Lincoln Square neighborhood enrolled a new student in 6th grade. The student was 12 now, having turned 12 in the hotel room, where Edmund had brought him a grocery store birthday cake and a card that said "Happy Birthday," Wren in Brenda's handwriting, because she had better handwriting than Edmund, and also because she had become, in the way that practical women of long professional loyalty sometimes do, fiercely protective of this child in a manner she would not have described as maternal, but absolutely was. The enrollment forms listed a guardian. Edmund Hargrove had begun the legal process in December, while the investigation was still ongoing, while Patrick was still missing, while everything was still uncertain. His attorney had raised an eyebrow. Edmund had said, "Process takes time. Start the process." His attorney, who had known him for 30 years, had started the process. Patrick, recovered enough by March to sit at the dinner table, had met Wren for the first time in February. Edmund had been watchful in a way he tried not to show. He needn't have worried. Patrick had looked at the boy across the table and said, "So you're the one who found me." And Wren had looked at his plate and said, "I just heard your name." And Patrick had said, "That was everything." And something passed between them, the particular recognition of people who have both been lost in their own ways and understand the geographies. And Edmund had excused himself to get more bread from the kitchen and stood there for a moment with both hands on the counter, very still. He was not a man who cried easily. He was not a man who cried at all, not since that cemetery in the rain. But standing in the kitchen with the sounds of his son, and this boy talking in the dining room, Edmund Hargrove found his eyes doing something unexpected and decided, privately, that the bread could wait. Wren walked into Lincoln Square Elementary in March, with new shoes and a backpack Brenda had let him choose himself, and a nervousness he tried to hide behind the same straight spine and level chin he'd had outside the Hargrove building in January. Edmund walked him to the door. He didn't go inside. The school had been very clear about drop-off procedures, and Wren had been very clear that Edmund going inside would be embarrassing beyond recovery. But he stood at the door and watched the boy walk down the hallway and felt, for the first time in 4 years, something that he recognized belatedly as a future. Not a resolution, not an ending, a beginning, the kind that starts quiet and ordinary and looks from the outside like nothing more than a child walking to class. Which was what it was, which was also the most important thing Edmund Hargrove had watched happen in his entire life. That evening the three of them, Edmund, Patrick, and Wren, sat at the dining table with deep dish pizza from the place on Wabash, because Edmund was a man who kept his word, and Wren ate 2 full slices with the serious focus of someone engaged in something sacred, and Patrick told a story about the worst meal he had ever eaten that made Wren laugh so suddenly and completely that he had to put down his food. Edmund listened to his son's voice. He watched the boy laugh. He thought of a January morning and a child standing barefoot in the cold with a cardboard sign, spine straight, chin up, watching. Not hoping yet, but getting ready to. Sometimes the smallest things hold the biggest truths. A child who kept watching when everyone else looked away. A name spoken once, twice, 3 times in the dark, and one person quiet enough to hear it. Wren had walked 4 miles in January to tell a stranger the truth, and somehow in the telling he had found his way home.